Welcome to Head to Heart Podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Markham. This bi-weekly podcast is designed to be a safe space to admit what we truly believe in our hearts. There's a huge difference between having biblical knowledge floating around in our heads and actually believing that it's true. Until God's truth makes its way into our hearts, nothing changes. We'll be doing a mix of solo episodes and interviews with friends who have experienced the freedom that comes when head knowledge becomes heart knowledge. We'll talk about overcoming lies in our relationships, mental health struggles, and the way we see ourselves. The truth will set you free so that you can walk every day in the freedom God desires for you. It's time to let go of those pressures, insecurities, and burdens. That's not yours to carry. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back to Head to Heart Podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Markham. I'm bringing a brand new guest to you today. So I'm just gonna let him have the wheel and introduce himself. So go ahead, Trevor, introduce who you are, what you do, and tell us a fun fact.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to virtually connect and meet with everyone. It's awesome. My name's Trevor Olesiak. I get to play in two different worlds, which is super fun for me. So I've been in ministry for 13 years. I lead our people and culture teams at a church in Jacksonville, Florida called Celebration Church. And that's been super fun to do the last, a little over a decade. And I also do executive coaching, which with a company called Novus Global, which has been a ton of fun for me as well. And so I love pouring into and developing people. And so this is kind of two different modalities of that allow me to do that. So that's awesome. Yeah.
Did you know that you probably didn't know, so I'm going to tell you. I'm actually from Fort Myers, Florida.
No way.
Yeah, so I know of Celebration Church.
Very cool. Yeah, I grew up in Melbourne, Florida, which is a couple hours south of Jacksonville, and I think a couple hours north of Fort Myers. So, yeah.
But you're not. No. You are currently living in Florida. How far away is where you live now from where you grew up?
2.5 to 3 hours, something like that.
Gotcha. Yeah. And why don't you give us a fun fact?
A fun fact. I'm a closet photographer. So I say it that way.
Do you take pictures of your closet? I'm just kidding.
That would be weird. No, no, I've always enjoyed photography, and there's been a couple of different points in my life where I tried to make it a career and just realized it kind of zapped the fun out of it for me. And so, but I love it. I still get hired to do things every once in a while and kind of dabble in it. So I guess I have three worlds I get to dabble in. Excuse me. But yeah, I love taking pictures, and I have three kids, so I got lots of fodder there for snapping photos. So yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Trevor, what have you been set free from?
Yeah, and I love this question. I love how we were talking a little bit before we got on the air here, how you think about this as a journey. And I lean into that too, and really like there's times when the Lord will, heal us in an instant, right? Or will break something off of our life. But more often than not, in my experience, freedom looks like something that we have to wake up and choose every day, right? And I love in Galatians, I think it is, it talks about how like it's for freedom that Christ set us free, and don't choose that yoke anymore, right? And so for me, especially as it relates to the conversation we're about to have, especially when I was younger, I dealt with a lot of fear, particularly around pain, and pain as it related to rejection. And what I've grown to realize, and what I still have to remind myself of constantly and have the Lord remind me of, is that, there's a difference between the truth of the events that we find ourselves in and then our own perceptions of those events. And I'm sure we'll get into this more and talk about this more because it's kind of a critical part of the idea of emotional intelligence. But understanding that our perception of events are not necessarily a true representation of what's going on. And so that's been something I've had to constantly kind of massage in my life and learn and obviously through the Lord's guidance, help me navigate that and recognize that rejection oftentimes says more about the person that I perceive to be doing the rejecting, than it does about me. And recognizing that I don't have to put on whatever label or mantle someone might be trying to put on me. And so that's the thing for me, is really, I go for things now that I never would have gone for in my younger years because I would have been too afraid. And so that's yeah, it's I'll finish the thought with this. The question I always ask myself, I wake up every day and ask myself, what does it look like to choose courage today?
Mm, that's awesome. And I'm currently in a job where it's the department at the college is called Student Care Services, and so I get to work with students in appointments sometimes, um, navigating, like, lies they've believed or wounds they've had from people in their past, and we just get to sort through, like, "Okay, this is what happened, but this is actually what God says about you." And
Great.
so I'm on the same page with you that we derive meanings from things that happen to us, but those meanings aren't necessarily true.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only whether they're capital T true or not, like that's what people are often looking for. Like, can I verify this is true or not? And oftentimes that's not the most resourceful approach. One of the things I've tried to lean into recently, especially like with feedback, is
Mhm,
recognizing that, um, even if it's only 1% true, what can I learn from what this person is sharing with me?
mhm,
Even if they don't intend it for my good or for my benefit, even if they're just being a jerk, which happens sometimes, right? How can I leverage that for my own growth, my own development, and not wear it like a name or like a label, but use it as a tool uh, to accomplish what it is I'm going after. And so
mhm,
even reframing some things that people will say to us and learning to leverage them can oftentimes really help us and help us grow.
mhm. Well, I think that ties in with what we're gonna talk about today, and that you use emotional intelligence so much just as your work as an executive coach, and then I'm sure at church as well. So, how would you define emotional intelligence, and why is it important?
Yeah, it's great question. I think it's an important question too, because I'm not sure that there's a single agreed upon definition of emotional intelligence. I've heard a bunch of different ones over my years of engaging with this topic and using tools. And so I think getting clear on what it is and what it isn't is super important. So I'd love to start with what it's not. And by the way, emotional intelligence has several different abbreviations, EI, EQ, different things. EQ is my preference, so you'll
Mhm.
you'll you'll hear me throughout this conversation probably use emotional intelligence and EQ interchangeably. So
Yeah,
that's I'm talking about the same thing, just to bring clarity to the audience. But
yeah.
here's what EQ is not. It's not about being nice. Um, it's also not someone who's, quote unquote, emotional. I hear that a lot,
Mhm,
you know? So how I like to define it in its simplest, broadest form, and then we can go deeper into it if you'd like to, but kind of the root layer that I like to define it as is the ability to identify, manage, and direct our emotions. That's simple. So I'm curious, does that bring up any questions for you? Is that what you thought I would say?
I don't know. I think so. I think that I also expected you to say something like, um, perceiving others, like something to have to do with our relationships with other people.
Yeah, great. And that absolutely is a facet of emotional intelligence.
Mhm.
Often the key here, I think, is our emotions are our emotions, right? And
Yeah.
so, even in how we relate to others through our emotional responses.
Mhm.
We don't always think about it that way. Research shows that we have around 400 emotional experiences every single day. So I'm curious, how many of those do you recognize or, kind of qualify as an emotional experience?
I don't know, maybe like 10.
Right. Yeah, so many of them so much of it is happening subconsciously, and we're not even realizing what's going on.
Mhm.
And so one of the things I love to do with my clients in this area is really, and part of the value of, even when you talk about why is it important, helping people slow down. And, I always say my goal for my clients is to think about how they think.
Mhm.
And the emotional intelligence gives us a framework or a model to be able to do that. You know, one thing I'll say too about emotional intelligence that's really important to distinct. Like, there's a distinction between, people tend to lump it in or group it in with strengths or personality frameworks and models. But, in most personality research would suggest that personality remains relatively fixed over time. Like, it doesn't really change that much as you grow or age or develop or anything like that. It stays relatively fixed. But emotional intelligence is different. It's a plastic skill set.
Hmm.
It naturally grows over time as we age, and we can also develop it with intentionality. If we put energy and effort and work into developing our skills in this area, we can see it grow. And so that's one of the main differences between like a personality model and an EQ model. And so that's one of the reasons I think it's really important, because we can actually do something about it, right? It's not just,
Yeah.
well, this is who I am. I'm just a jerk to people. Nothing, it is what it is.
Mhm.
No, I can actually, if I am not good, like to your point, if I'm not good at interacting with other people, or I notice that there's gaps there, or I'm not realizing all of the potential in my relationships that I'd like to, there's actually something you could do about it, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that gives me so much hope for the future.
Absolutely.
So, do we see any really prime examples of this in the Bible?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I mean, honestly, the idea of emotions in general, I mean, there's countless examples in scripture. Like, even God himself, especially in his Trinitarian nature, like we see all sorts of different examples of, God the Father, and in especially in the Old Testament, there's a lot of emotionally descriptive language
Mhm.
that's used, in talking about how, like, I think what comes to mind, one of the earliest examples is Genesis chapter 6, where it says that God was actually grieved that he had made men on the earth, right? That's a
Mhm.
very emotionally descriptive word. Um, so that's one. I mean, there's plenty of examples in the person of Jesus. One of the ones that's quoted all the time is the him flipping tables outside the synagogue, right?
Mhm.
And so it's a display of anger there. And so there's language used around that. There's obviously times when Jesus grieved, and was emotional in that context. And even the Holy Spirit has this too. Like, the Bible says that the Holy Spirit can be grieved, that he pours out love. And even thinking like several fruits of the Spirit have emotional connections, like joy. I think of joy. I,
Mhm.
I wouldn't say that joy is purely an emotion, but it certainly has emotional qualities. So, emotions are clearly present in Scripture. I think one of the things that comes up a lot in church circles, is less about whether or not emotions exist, but whether or not we can trust them.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge conversation in church.
Yeah, and so, like, here's my take on this. The truth is that, like, we're imagers of God, right? The Bible
Mhm.
makes that clear. So if God and his triune nature has emotions, experiences emotions, then if we're imagers of God, then we do too. And if God is experiencing emotions, that can't be inherently bad,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
That wouldn't make sense. So, there's certainly scriptures that suggest that the heart is deceitful, right? Like, you see that, and some, I've seen some church circles and Christian circles tend to really run with that and take it, to an extreme, and say that emotions are evil, can't be trusted at all,
Right.
right? Then there's the pendulum swings the complete other way too, with a lot of the like hyper charismatic movements and all that, where if emotions aren't present, like in other words, they think of emotions as an indicator that I'm actually in communion with God, or with this, like the spirit is moving if I'm feeling it, right? I've
Right.
seen both expressions. Um, and the truth is, I think for me, uh, there's not a clean distinction like that, right? Emotions are amoral in a way. It's great data, it's great information. And then really not to go too, theologically deep here on this, but I think one of the key mistakes I see Christians make a lot is they try to separate the body from the soul,
Hmm.
right? And they try to think about them as two distinct attributes of who they are, and they're not integrated in any way. But I mean, that's completely incongruous with the ancient Hebrew mindset,
That's true.
right?
Yep.
I mean, you may have explored this topic on prior podcasts, but the Hebrew word nefesh, it's often translated as soul, and that's what people will think about as soul, but it actually more literally means like the throat, right? And
Hmm.
the deeper Hebrew meaning is that it represents a living, breathing, whole person. It describes our wholeness, even in the distinct parts. Like just like God is distinct, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. We image that. Even though he's distinct in that, he's also a whole being, a whole person. Um, and we're the same way. We're interconnected in wholeness. And
Yeah.
so, and which, by the way, is corroborated by modern neuroscience, which continues to disprove that there's like any discernible distinction between mind and body. So I think that's fascinating. Allowing, if Christians were able to think about themselves from a place of wholeness, I really believe they'd get a better understanding and grasp of how emotions are designed to be really an integral part of our being.
Yeah.
Hopefully I didn't go too deep there on that one.
No, no. What is too deep, really?
Fair.
um, I just can think of several places in the Psalms where David refers to, in some translations, it'll say like his heart or
Mhm.
soul, and then other places it says his kidneys. And so that's just another example of that.
Yeah, well, and that's the Psalms, Lamentations. I mean, there's like a lot of those poetic books are very emotionally descriptive, and they're really part of the reason we think of them as beautiful poetry is because of their emotionally descriptive language and how they stir up emotions in us because we can relate to the experiences.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, that's a good point. So, if we're just looking inward at ourselves as we are currently, how can we assess our own emotional intelligence?
Well, there's a lot of there's potentially a lot of different ways. Here's my favorite way to get an understanding of where we are in these different skill sets, and they are that they're skill sets. Okay, um, my favorite way is to really lean into and to utilize a quality, scientifically reliable, and validated assessment. Um, it's I say this a lot. We say this a lot in the coaching firm as well. Is like you can't do surgery on yourself,
Yep.
right? And so I mean, there's a lot of things, mindfulness and different techniques and tools you can use to become more emotionally aware. But it can be really difficult to action against that or to create a plan for growth if there's not a clear understanding of where those specific gaps are for you in your skill set.
Mhm.
Like real briefly, let me say this. My favorite assessment, by the way, is the EQI 2.0.
Mhm.
Fantastic assessment. But it's not one of those, you can go online and, pay $10 and take it, right? It's,
Mhm.
gives you your Harry Potter house that you're going to be in. You know what I mean? Like a lot of these online assessments are, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it really is, it's actually a clinical grade tool. So you have to use it with a trained professional.
Mm.
And that's part of where it gets its power, I think. But in that model, it covers kind of 5 key areas. Is self-perception, understanding our own emotions and how we view ourselves emotionally. Self-expression, how do we express ourselves? Once we feel something, we're going to start responding and doing something about that feeling. And as we do that, we're going to inevitably bump up into some other people, which is the interpersonal component you were talking about earlier.
Mhm.
And then from there, we need to make decisions on things, and so emotions play a big role in our decision making. And then finally, stress management. How do we manage and deal with stress and stressful things in our lives, right? And so, uh, the cool thing about the EQI is it looks at those kind of 5 different domains and different skills that are in each one of those. And it really helps you narrow down. So can I give you a personal example? Like when I
Yeah.
first took this assessment,
Yeah.
so I'm a pastor. I've been in ministry 13 years. I first took this assessment maybe 6 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that. And empathy was by far the lowest skill set for me, which is part of the interpersonal domain.
That's surprising since you're a pastor.
It's incredibly difficult to be a good pastor if you don't care about other people.
Mhm.
Right? Which is funny because empathy is a lot deeper than that, right? It's not just about caring for others, although that's certainly a component of it. Really, what I came to realize, and so here's why I bring this up. I never would have realized this if it wasn't for a robust tool like this.
Mhm.
So empathy is not only like recognizing and understanding and appreciating how other people feel. That's an important part of it, but it's also the ability to articulate that understanding to someone else. In other words, if they're not picking up what I'm putting down, it's not real empathy.
Mhm.
And that was the gap for me. And actually, this ties back to kind of what we originally talked about in the first question of a fear of rejection. I realized that I actually wasn't displaying empathy towards others because I was afraid that they would reject my care. They would
Mm.
reject my attempt to understand and to reach out and to appreciate. And so there's a whole that's a whole nother rabbit trail. But it really took a robust tool and a coach. Whenever you use a tool like this, it requires coaching. It took a coach to help me see that part of the gap for me. And I'll tell you, it revolutionized the way I pastored people by gaining that insight and then putting a plan of action into developing that skill set.
Mhm. Wow, that's so cool.
But here's what I'll say, like, just to kind of double down on this idea, whatever route you go in terms of developing in your emotional intelligence, use a tool, don't use a tool, mindfulness. There's a lot of ways you could. My biggest advice to anyone who wants to grow is just don't go it alone.
Mhm.
Whether you do it in a group, whether you hire a coach, whether you have conversations with your spouse or with a friend, it is we are communal beings. We're designed for relationship, and we grow best in community. And so that would be my encouragement.
Yeah. No, that's really good because how can we see our own blind spots, right?
Yeah. Again, we can't do surgery on ourselves. Yep.
Mhm. That would be terrible. If we've had a hard time identifying how we feel or why we feel the way we feel, what are some steps we can take to improve this? And it just gives me so much hope that this is something we grow in over time instead of just we're stuck at this one level we're at.
Absolutely. Really, what you're describing is the skill of emotional self awareness.
Mhm.
Like the ability to recognize what emotions are, putting words and names to them. In other words, you have an emotional vocabulary that you can lean on. um, and then the why part is a little bit different. But first of all, like, we can't even begin to explore why we're feeling something until we can recognize, well, what is it that we're actually feeling?
Mhm.
And so leaning into emotional self-awareness, I think, is a great skill to develop. And it's one of the kind of the facets on like the EQI assessment. Um, but one simple thing that I'll suggest to clients to do, if like, hey, like, I'm feeling a lot of things, but I don't know what I'm feeling, or I don't know how to describe what I'm feeling. This is going to sound really, really simple, but helped a ton of people I've worked with. Just Google emotion words
Mm-hmm.
and look at a list of emotional language.
Yeah, or like a
Um,
feelings wheel.
yeah, there you go. Feelings wheel, absolutely. And that really helps. A lot of times, it makes our brains can converge onto things when we're looking at a list more easily than when it's fully open ended. So by creating a list, it helps our brain kind of zero in on, oh yeah, I'm feeling pretty melancholic. That's what it is, right? Or something, especially like I like to describe emotional self-awareness this way. If you think of a box of crayons, right? Crayola crayons, whatever. Some people are like the 8 crayon box.
Mm-hmm.
They can identify a couple of base emotions, mad, sad, glad, bad, whatever else rhymes with that, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and those are the emotions that they can describe, and but every human is vastly more complicated than that. And so we tend to direct our feelings and put them in one of these giant buckets, and really that cheapens the emotional experience as a human being. So what I'll invite clients to do is like, we need to get more crayons in that box for you, right? So let's trade in that 8 crayon box for the 128 crayon box, right? The giant, massive one that my kids love to leave all over the house and melt into the carpet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, let's learn how to actually put language around what we're feeling and what we're experiencing, um, because that's really helps us in terms of when we talked about, kind of going back to the original definition of emotional intelligence is a part of it is identifying, right? And so that helps us identify. Um, another simple thing you can do to really pay attention, like, are recognizing the shifts in your physical body.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So different emotions produce different physiological responses. Like if you're really upset, your heart might be racing, you may be clenching your fists without realizing it. Maybe you're
Yeah.
sweating a little bit. Right.
Yeah.
Like that's a great indicator that, it can help you. It's like a thread I like to pull on to help me get to the root of what it is I'm actually feeling if I'm paying attention to what my body is experiencing. Because the truth is again, our minds are connected with our bodies. They're
Mm-hmm.
not, they're inseparable. And so, physiological responses to emotions, you know, uh, everybody maybe expresses them slightly differently, but there's a lot of similarities, that can be great indicators for us on what's going on. So
Yeah.
those are some ways to identify, and understand, okay, what is it that I'm feeling?
Mm-hmm.
Right now, why I'm feeling it is a more difficult question.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where, what I alluded to before of the idea of events versus perception. Um, if you hear nothing else in this episode, this may be the most important thing to recognize.
Okay, everyone, listen in. Listen in.
I'll try not to screw it up here, but so again, events are the facts of what's happening. It's what we can observe with our senses, what we can see. But our brains are going to then we're going to tell ourselves a story. We're going to assign meaning to those facts. And 9 times out of 10, that's unverified,
Mm.
right? So let me give you an example. Maybe, there's some people who are listening in their car right now. Maybe you just got cut off on your way to work or wherever it is you're going, right? Um, I'm sure everyone listening to this call responded in a way of, care. I'm going to kind of, give them some space, maybe say a prayer that they are getting where they're supposed to go, whatever, right? Just, really being, understanding of what's
Mhm.
going on.
Yes, we'd hope. We'd hope.
Right. Yeah. Maybe there's some other people in the world, and I certainly would not identify with this group at all. Um, but there's other people in the world who, man, when they get cut off in traffic, they get a little upset, right? They may get a little close to the person's bumper. They may tell them they're number one.
Mhm.
Use some colorful language, perhaps with emotional undertones, right? you know, so notice the exact same thing happened to both people. but their response was completely different. Why is that? Because the stories they told themselves about what the meaning they assigned to the events was vastly different.
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
angry driver said, this person's a jerk. They don't care about anyone else. They're making the roads unsafe, right?
Right.
The other person maybe was thinking, man, maybe they just got some bad news. Maybe they're on their way to the hospital right now. Maybe something's going on that I don't know about,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And so the point is not which one is right and which one is wrong. The point is which one is a more resourceful story to tell ourselves, right?
Right.
And so recognizing that the perceptions that we have are actually what drive our emotional responses. It's not the events. You know, when when you walk into a party and someone doesn't say hi to you, you can tell yourself all sorts of stories about what's going on there. One will produce maybe a response of, hey, I need to go make sure I circle back with that person and check in on them and see how they're doing, see if something's going on. One maybe says, gosh, I can't believe they just, treated me that way. And so this is where we start to get into the directing our emotions component of emotional intelligence. Because the truth is that our emotions don't derive from the circumstances and events in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Our emotions derive from the stories we tell ourselves about the events and the circumstances of our lives.
Wow. I feel like that's going to just set a lot of listeners free from a lot of bitterness, actually, because if we continue to tell ourselves stories like, this person's out to get me, they don't like me, why did they act like that? It must have been my fault. Like, of course, we're going to feel bitter or frustrated, sad, whatever it may be. But if we direct our emotions towards different meanings, that could actually be the whole problem. You don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, the goal is not to necessarily determine which one is right, which one is wrong,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're not moralizing it necessarily. It's, when I have clients who are really stressed out and they want to reduce the stress in their lives, they're almost always convinced that the circumstances have to change in order for stress to go down. Right. So okay, if I'm at a certain level of stress, logically there's two ways to reduce. I can, fix the circumstances and reduce my stress levels, or I can increase my capacity to handle stress.
Mm-hmm.
But what I always help people think about, what if there's a third option? What if the stress that we're experiencing is actually something we are creating?
Yeah, in the way that we're thinking about the stressors.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the thing. Thoughts are thoughts. Like if I get cut off in traffic, my initial thought's going to be, what a jerk. Right? But I have a choice on whether I believe that thought or not.
Mm-hmm.
You see, that's what I think scripture is talking about when they say to take every thought captive. We can't actually control our thoughts. They just happen. What we can control is, what do we choose to believe?
Right.
Do
Yeah,
we
I think there's a little phrase that's like, I can't control what birds fly over my head, but I can control the birds that build a nest in my hair.
I love that.
Have you heard that
I don't
before?
think I've ever heard that before. That's
Oh yeah, well,
fantastic.
you can take and use it as much as you want.
I'm stealing it, and I'm not giving you credit either. I'm just
That's
kidding.
fine. I didn't make it up.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Like we decide what and because that's how the enemy works, right? The enemy he can speak to our minds. He can whisper thoughts into our ears but he has no power to force us to believe it.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually put ourselves in bondage more often than anything or anyone else puts us in bondage, because of what we choose to believe.
That's so good. Wow. That's so good.
But here's the thing, it's easy to say that. It's difficult in the moment
Mm-hmm.
to recognize that's what's happening. And
Mm-hmm.
so creating space in your life, again, to think about how you think, to slow things down, right? I use this example, in like keynotes and stuff is, like, uh, when you've been living in a house for a while, like for a couple of years or whatever, you wake up in the middle of the night, get a glass of water. You don't have to think about where the light switch is or where the cup cabinet is, or like it's kind of autopilot. Like if you ever wake up in the middle of the night, you're probably half asleep and you just get to where you're going and don't even realize and remember how to do it. Right? It's muscle memory.
Right. Yep.
When something new, like if we go stay at a friend's house, or let's say we sell our house and buy a new house, those first couple of weeks in that new house, we're stubbing our toe all over the place. Like
That's true.
we're slapping the wall trying to find the light switch because
Mm-hmm.
it's not part of our memory yet. Like in other words, we're forced to slow down because the environment is unfamiliar. And so the truth is, like, the more familiar our thinking becomes, the faster it happens and the less we pay attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we want to actually improve in our area of thinking, we have to intentionally slow things down. And our brains want to decrease the time between a trigger and the way we respond. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how we see, even strongholds, to go to the extreme, but just patterns in our life, right? And so if anytime we want to address an unhealthy pattern or we want to change something, we have to intentionally slow down that time between trigger and response to have time to analyze what's actually going on and potentially select a more resourceful belief.
That's worth all the time of this podcast right there. Wow, that's so good. So how could we spot an emotionally intelligent person? How can we spot emotional intelligence in other people? Like, wow, they're doing this really well.
That's a fascinating question, and I'm going to give you a bit of a cop-out answer at first.
Okay, that's fine.
The best way to notice emotional intelligence in others is to develop emotional maturity in ourselves.
I knew it. I knew you were going to
You
say
knew I was going to
that.
go there, right? And so, like, it's a good question, and there's answers to it. I don't know if it's a resourceful question, because what people end up doing is they like to look externally whenever there's especially in the domain of like interpersonal relationships,
Mhm.
right? Like we all do this. If things are going wrong, it's their fault. If they're going right, it's because I'm great,
Mm.
right? And so what this process invites people to do is start with ourselves and say, hey, where do I need to grow? Where are the opportunities for me to level up? And I think the more we do that, the more we'll see those things in others. So I don't know if that's helpful, but probably an answer you were more looking for the question. One of the dimensions of emotional intelligence as part of the model is really that interpersonal domain we talked about. But there's kind of three specific skills in there, but two of them are really important. And it's interpersonal relationships and empathy. And so interpersonal relationships, like that is that's the plug, if you like plugging the cord into the outlet and the electricity starts flowing, right? Like that's the conduit uh, of emotions from one person to another. And so recognizing but here's the thing that people miss, and it's going to tie back to my first answer, is most people will look in a relationship, and when there's gaps, it's easy to spot, maybe something we'd prefer someone to do or a different way
Mhm.
we like them to behave. But the question I invite people to ask themselves in the area of interpersonal relationships are, do I understand the way that my emotional responses impact this other person?
Mm.
For better or worse, for good or bad, right?
Mhm.
That's not always a negative thing, but just being aware of the fact that my emotions absolutely play a role in my relationships.
Right.
you know
Right.
and then obviously empathy we talked about already, of really being able to recognize and put ourselves in someone else's shoes and perspective, and expand, and a lot of times challenge the stories we tell ourselves. So really, I think a lot of what we've already talked about, those are some of the things that really play into this. But my encouragement is always, hey, start looking. The first question should always be, in what ways am I contributing to whatever challenge I'm experiencing with someone?
Hmm. That's good. It kind of just reflects it back on ourselves because we can't control other people anyway.
Yeah, you can't manage any other people's. I was just having a conversation with a client about this. Like, they were concerned about the holidays and how to manage the holidays and all the different things they have going on and different family dynamics, and they want to keep everyone happy and all that. And I reminded them, hey, you actually can't control their emotions,
Hmm.
nor should you want to. There are people who want to, but you can't control their emotions. The only thing you can do is to build bridges, be clear. Clarity helps to clarity always helps to build bridges in a relationship. If you're
Hmm.
clear in the way that you communicate, you make clear requests of people. That's really important. I heard this the other day, and it's honestly really challenged me. Is that healthy people ask for what they want,
That's true. Yeah.
and I don't always ask for what I want. And again, they may not reciprocate, no problem, but the having a solid sense of self and being willing to say, hey, here's my request of you, or here's actually how I would like for this relationship, this thing to go. That is a super helpful skill set to have in developing thriving relationships.
Yeah. We just can't expect other people to be mind readers.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So if
I wish
someone,
I wish I could, trust me. I've been
I know,
married,
we wish, we really wish.
yeah, I've been married almost 14 years, and I wish I could read my wife's mind. Uh, but that's something, like, especially in a marriage relationship or dating relationship, anything like that, like learning to have um, that dialogue of, and I love using, like, even so one, and I didn't come up with this idea, but there's this kind of understanding of requests, right? Or expectations is probably a better way to say it. Like, expectations versus agreements, right? So often where we get in trouble in our interpersonal dynamics is we have expectations of others.
Hmm.
Like, to your point, we can't read each other's minds. A lot of those, 9 times out of 10, those expectations are unsaid. We just have them. And so one of the things that's really helped me develop in that area is I don't have any expectations of anyone. I seek to create agreements. And like the first step of creating an agreement is actually sharing, hey, here's what I would like to see. Now, what would you like to see? And let's create agreement with each other.
Yeah. That's so good. So if someone would want to dive deeper into this topic, do you have any resources that you'd recommend?
Um, yeah, 3 books come to mind. And there's a ton of, I mean, there's YouTube stuff, there's all sorts of resources, but like 3 books that I've used quite a bit. One secular resource, and 2 that are actually from a like Christian biblical perspective, which is really helpful. But one is called The EQ Edge, by Stephen Stein and Howard Book. They so they are actually part of the team that developed the EQI 2.0. So it's sort of a companion resource to the assessment, but it dives deep into all of the different facets of emotional intelligence and how you can develop them. There's a couple of different, uh, you know, tools and resources and things you can use to learn to identify emotions and develop them and all that. So that's a great book, The EQ Edge. Then 2 others I like. One is called Developing Emotionally Mature Leaders, written by Aubrey Malphurs. Fantastic. It's more about developing emotional intelligence in your teams. Like, so if you're leading a team, this is a great resource. And he talks a lot about from a specific ministry context or church context. So if you're in ministry, or even if you're just in a community of faith or of believers, that's a great resource for developing emotional intelligence in a group. And then why emotions matter. Tristan Collins and Jonathan Collins. Jonathan Collins is part of the team behind the Bible Project, if you're familiar with the Bible Project. And so he and his wife wrote a book about this, about why emotions matter, recognizing your body signals, grow in emotional intelligence, and discover an embodied spirituality. Really a beautiful read there as well. So those are the three that I would recommend.
That's awesome. Well, if you had any final encouragements, one thing you could just leave listeners with before this episode ends, what would that be?
Great question. The first thing that comes to mind is leaning back into the idea of event perception, but we kind of talked about that already. So I'll give you a bonus one here. Maybe dispel a little bit of a myth. I know your audience is primarily female. Is that right?
Yes, primarily female.
Yeah. So cultural stereotypes. What do they say about women? Right. That
they're too emotional.
Right. Women are more emotional. They're all that, and then so a lot of people will then extrapolate that and assume that women are better at emotional intelligence than men or whatever, and it's actually not true according to research. Now, there's some specific skills that women tend to have a more of a general competency that might be higher than a man at first. Like an example of that is actually empathy. So women tend to test a little bit higher in empathy than men. But when you look at all of the emotional intelligence skills across the board, there's really no difference in gender. Mm-hmm. Now they have, again, varying strengths and weaknesses, but both genders have an equal ability to be emotionally intelligent. And so I like that tends to surprise people when I share that. And so I just think that's maybe a fun fact. I probably should have shared that as the fun fact at the beginning. So that's a fun fact. But here's the encouragement I would leave behind that is to remember that wherever you are right now, in whatever your level of emotional intelligence is, let's say it's really low in certain areas. Great. Once you know your starting point, you can grow. Mm-hmm. This is not a fixed skill set. This is not something that you are destined to live with for the rest of your life. You can actually, with intentional work, you can actually develop in these areas. And there's we've talked about several different ways you can do that, but I just want to encourage people who maybe have been told you're too emotional or you don't. The great thing is part of pursuing emotional maturity is getting really, really clear about current reality. Here's where I'm at right now. And that's awesome because now I have a path for how I can move forward. So hope that helps.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you so much for coming on and being the guest today, Trevor. Thank you for sharing all your wisdom. And I feel like I know coaching sessions are different, but I feel like this is like a freebie for people.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love talking about this stuff, and it's been a pleasure getting to meet you and have this conversation. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Head to Heart Podcast. It's a joy to record them and a joy to have you listen. I love hearing from you. So if any part of this episode was helpful, go ahead, share it on your Instagram story and tag us. The handle is headtoheart_podcast. And if you would be so kind, leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or our website. It helps out the show so much when you do. We'll be releasing episodes to you every other Friday, so stay tuned and thanks for joining us.